All right. So officially, good morning, bonjour tout le monde, et bienvenue on behalf of Fourth Space and the 17 Rooms exercise organizers. As we get settled into this virtual space, we'd like to acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We recognize and are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their care for these lands and waters and their teachings about the earth and our relations. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal has been a gathering place for many First Nations for millennia, and today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. Recognizing and respecting the presence and ongoing connections of these historical and contemporary communities is an important step towards building trust and creating or renewing relationships. So this morning, you are all here to consider SDG 15, a life on land. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate. We are running 17 Rooms exercise via Fourth Space as part of our mission here to create engagement around the project's initiatives, commitments, and of course, dialogues and development across Concordia University. So it is our pleasure, as always, to welcome you in, both participants and some audience members who might be joining us, as well as the people who made this exchange, make this happen basically weekly. Notably Jason Enns and Monica Mulrennan, today's facilitators, as well as Concordia knowledge brokers Prem Suryakumar and David Ward, who are also here behind the scenes with us and were instrumental in making these sessions happen. So Jason and Monica will be taking you through a number of exercises and will be encouraging your active participation. We're a small group here today, so feel free to just keep your camera on for those of you who can and jump in with a raised hand at any point. And we might also invite you to put some ideas into the chat. So when you do so, please just know that we are collecting what you write in the chat as well as we reflect on this exercise after we've gone through every room. So your thoughts will be safely kept and reflected upon later on. All right, that's it for me. It's time to hand it over to ED Strategic Initiatives in the Office of the Provost, Jason Enns. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome everyone. I'll just give a brief introduction to me, just so folks kind of know who I am and what I do. Monica will do the same, and then we'll go do a quick tour around the screen, so to speak, so that people can kind of introduce themselves and give a sense of what their connection is with this conversation. So I work on various strategic initiatives in the Provost's office, including this work on Concordia's engagement with the SDGs. My kind of background and motivation for connection to this conversation is stems from my own dissertation work back in the day, where I examined universities' commitments to civic engagement. And one of the things that was quite notable in that work is really the absence of a kind of shared framework or shared goals that universities could work toward with governments and nonprofits and communities. And I think the SDGs provide a really interesting kind of framework for providing shared, common, collective objectives that universities can work on with respect to improving their cities, their communities, and contributing positively to sustainable development. In addition, the SDGs are compelling for me, just like so many others, like you, I'm sure, have this grave concern about just the sustainability of our planet and living outside of planetary boundaries, and all the implications that has for future generations, our children and our colleagues' children and others that will follow us. So the SDGs are this common language where we can articulate some of these broad goals and objectives for us and our planet. So I'm going to hand over to Monica to make her own introduction, and then we'll go around the room.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Monica Mulrennan, Associate Vice President of Research, responsible for research, development and outreach. I'm also a professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment. My interest and perspective on the SDGs, I guess, is it's informed by partnered research with Indigenous communities in coastal and marine settings. Worked with Indigenous communities for nearly 30 years. Worked particularly closely with the Cree of Iwichti, and also Torres Strait Islanders in Northern Australia, on a range of community-led priorities for stewardship and protection of traditional land and sea territories. My interest in the SDG framework as a researcher and also as a mum, very much motivated by a deep concern about the declining health of our planet and a sense of urgency to contribute to efforts to redefine our relationship with it. And I see the SDGs as a list of good intentions. They offer a starting point for dialogue about how we might fashion an improved world of social and environmental justice and responsibility. And as Anna reminded us in the territorial acknowledgement, these conversations also present us with an opportunity to advance our commitment to reconciliation and our responsibilities as settlers and as treaty partners. So Jason, back to you for the tour de table.
Great, so I'm just going to go around my screen as I see folks, and I'll ask Elias to introduce himself first.
Good morning, everyone. So first, thank you, Jason, Monica, and Anna for organizing this. So I'm Elias Gadam. I'm a professor in the Department of Mechanical, Industrial, and Aerospace Engineering, and Associate Vice President, Special Projects at the Office of the Vice President, Graduate Research and Graduate Studies. So, and well, my interest actually, well, this is not my first one. Attending is not, and it's really like, well, broad interest in general is mostly like as a citizen, and also like this is not related to directly to my research. My research is more on cardiovascular fluid dynamics, but related also to the teaching and like to the profession, which means that as an engineer, I feel that as engineers, we always focused on efficiency, power production, and we're left on the side like the impact on the planet. And this one actually is specifically like on land. So when I see also things like a target, I believe 15.2 and 15.3, one is the deforestation, the other one is desertification. So which are extremely important. So I'm coming from the country of the south, from Algeria, like the biggest desert in the world, the Sahara Desert. So definitely those are extremely important point to consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Elias. That's great. And strong personal connection with this SDG. Emma.
Hi, so my name's Emma daPla. I'm a professor in the biology department. I'm an ecologist. I work on plant-insect interactions. And the interactions between herbivorous insects and the plants they eat are really kind of the basis of all terrestrial ecosystems. So I've got, a research interest in terms of understanding how these things work. I'm obviously also extremely committed to the continuing of life on Earth because it's a big deal. Couple of other things I've gotten involved in more recently. One is nature education, both for our students and for people in the broader community, because the research is clear that people who feel a strong personal connection to an ecosystem or to nature from where they come from are the people who are committed towards conservation and the people who do take steps to make that happen. So I'd like to, and I notice our student body are very urban. They often have not had that opportunity to connect with nature. And so I think that's one, contribution that I try to make that Concordia can do. Another thing I've been involved with too is starting to do partnerships with NGOs, mostly in the city, because it's remarkable how there's huge amount of like energy and talent and knowledge, but they're often lacking resources that for us are just kind of taken for granted, like basic lab equipment or statistical knowledge or things like that. So I think we have an awful lot to offer in doing partnership with, small grassroots type organizations.
Are there a couple in particular that you would name that you've?
So I've got a project now with Urban Nature. We've used the Canada Summer Jobs Program. We've hired 5 Concordia students to work with them. I've been working with Sauvant La Falaise, Saint-Jacques.
Cool.
The Technopark Oiseau too. So there's.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Emma. That's super.
I've also got thoughts about managing the green space on campus, because I think that's something I've been talking with Carly Zeter. She knows a lot more about this than I do. But there do not, as far as we can tell, exist kind of guidelines for biodiversity respectful management of, I guess, institutional campuses. And I think if we have an opportunity here for Concordia to both kind of pioneer managing our own green space in a way that's more respectful of biodiversity, but also perhaps developing best practices and guidelines that could spread, in the same way as that we have best practices for energy efficient buildings. We could do the same thing for green spaces.
Amazing. We're going to plant a flag there, because that we'll circle back to that, and as part of our conversation about kind of what might we undertake in related to life on land. So that's a great prompt and cue.
I think that's a big one. And Carly Zeter has been talking with Rocio about it, so they're really the ones who are knowledgeable, but they weren't able to make it here.
Yeah, we tried to get her to the conversation today, and she wasn't able to join. But that's super great, and we'll circle back to that definitely.
Okay.
Perfect. Pedro.
Yeah, so my name is Pedro PerezNido. I'm a professor of biology at Concordia, and I'm also the Canada Research Chair in Spatial Ecology and Biodiversity. So I'm a biodiversity scientist by training, and interesting enough, I'm attending this Zoom meeting from Vancouver, where I am attending the International Biogeography Society meeting, which very fitting for these discussions today, because literally is a society that deals with understanding life on Earth. So biogeography is the field that tries to understand how species are distributed across space and time, including evolutionary time, hundreds and hundreds of millions. So most of my research involves understanding the processes that underlie the distribution of biodiversity from environmental perspectives, from species interactions perspectives, from coevolutionary perspectives, and so on. And the work that I do, they varies from very tiny scales, from small streams and lakes, down the road here in Quebec, to planetary levels. This is only feasible because of our ability today to use open science to actually amass all this data that biodiversity scientists and including citizens. A lot of the work that I do involves citizen science, because there's so many. I don't even like to use the term amateur scientists, because they literally understand sometimes the taxonomy of birds and fungus and insects much better than many professionals. So one of my main interests, I've been involved quite heavily in the past 10 years, including now, in programs that try to monitor the changes of life on Earth or biodiversity at spatial and temporal scales, that we can monitor the systems to actually create action plans and policies that allow provinces, our country, Canada, and including a lot of exchanges, international exchanges with other countries that are also involved in understanding how life is changing, particularly in this past 100 years. And so it's a way to adapt, it's a way to conserve, but it's also a way to manage, and particularly manage with the understanding that humans will always be around, and that obviously at the same time it challenges things, but we need to keep that in mind. The other thing too that I like to emphasize, something that Emma said that made me think, is that a lot of my research involves quite a bit of computational, mathematical, and statistical approaches. So also, interesting enough, it helps to link some sort of the students that are not necessarily interested in natural history, but they are interested also in STEMs in a very heavy way, but they can see actually using very technical approaches to get involved into something that is so important. So I feel that the field of biodiversity science has those very modern approaches that can involve. Many mathematicians are working with us, many physicists, not working of us directly, but they also not only directly, but then themselves consider they consider themselves as biodiversity scientists.
Great, thank you, Pedro. I was going to make the joke earlier on as you were starting your introduction that you, of course, sailed to Vancouver. You didn't fly, right? I'm sure.
Yes.
or
I started walking 5 weeks ago.
That's right. That's right. Of course, we just wanted everybody to make
Yes.
that clear. I myself was in Victoria 2 weeks ago for one of these sessions, and it was actually the climate action session, and I had to admit I flew to Victoria during that session, which wasn't so quite paradoxical. Anyway, moving on. Angela, we haven't given you a chance to introduce yourself. Oh, you're still muted.
The wrong button.
Yeah,
Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Angela Cross. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment. And so my training, I was originally trained in agronomy, so agronomic engineering. And then I moved on into natural ecosystems, but with a major focus on like geospatial technologies and remote sensing. I have to say, like, I worked for a while with organic agriculture farming, so inspection of organic farms. And the difference between traditional farms and organic farms is huge. Like if you walk through a traditional farm, there is no life, you know, it's like huge areas of one crop type. No diversity, which is the perfect way to get, crop diseases, because crop diseases don't happen just because of there's it's not that they don't happen for a reason. It's when there are so many plants of the same type, it's very easy to have a crop disease. But if you have biodiversity, it's kind of, you have the natural enemies combined with that. And so when you go to organic farm, you have life in the farm. You know, you have birds, you have bees, you have so many sounds in it. It's a huge difference, and it's kind of it's stuck in my mind, even though I moved on and then I shifted a bit towards natural ecosystems. Whereas my research really focuses on looking at vegetation in general, vegetation dynamics, natural ecosystems, including agriculture as an artificial ecosystem, and then using as a core of my research, using remote sensing and geospatial technologies to evaluate the response of vegetation to anthropogenic or natural factors. And so my interest, I think, I have always had a huge interest in working with indicators or monitoring frameworks, and especially normalized, standardized monitoring frameworks, because I think we should be able to compare over time, even if it's in one place. You should be able to compare over time how your policies are, or how your actions are improving whatever you aim to improve in terms of the environment. And without a framework, you can't do that. And so I was all interested in when we had the Millennium Development Goals, and then that evolved into the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think I think it's a must to have a framework, a standardized framework. And especially because I work with geospatial technologies, it makes it very convenient for me to work at all different scales, so local, regional, global, and one major part that I actually like to work with is kind of looking at indicators for different types of changes in the environment and monitoring those. Yeah, I think that's my link to this group and my interest.
that's great. Thanks, everyone. And it's great, even in a small group here, we have a really diverse range of expertise and interests that have the common thread of this of life on land and biodiversity. I'm going to hand over to Monica now to give us just a quick walkthrough of kind of where we're going in today's conversation and what we're trying to accomplish. And then we'll dive in with a first high-level question that we'll pose to you about the SDG framework itself, and then we'll think about the particulars of SDG 15.
Thanks, Jason. Yes, so the 17 rooms exercise is really about bringing faculty and staff and students to engage in conversations rather than presentations. And like really what we want to do is to consider how we want to engage with and respond to the SDG framework, and to take a look at the SDG targets related to life on land, and to assess our current efforts and consider how we might deepen or extend our engagement. We recognize that there's a lot of work happening, many of you very much involved in that work at Concordia related to life on land. So we're not trying to come to an agreement on specific actions to undertake so much as really, how the SDGs can help us assess where we're at and imagine where we want to go. And the 17 rooms exercise that we're conducting is part of the voluntary university review that we're currently undertaking to help us create an SDG game plan for the university. And that will be all of that to unfold in the fall. But in terms of today's agenda, so as you'll have seen from the package that Jason prepared, the central question, how might the SDG framework help increase the impact of Concordia's activities related to protecting land and life, keeping in mind that there are important institutional commitments around decolonization and indigenization, anti-Black racism, and EDI that should inform how we answer that particular big question. In terms of the agenda, we're getting through the introduction here, but we're moving on into then an exercise where we really want to just take stock of the limitations and benefits of the SDG framework. I mean, there's been a fairly substantial buy-in, but they're not without their limitations. So just to put those on the table, I think important framing for our discussion. We also want to take a look at what's happening at Concordia, so the type of activities that we're already engaged in. And then we will focus in on the targets that are very much, they've been developed for an international audience. We want to look at how to make those much more relevant for us, the university relevant targets. And the main part of the exercise today is the ideation, just the brainstorming, and we look forward to getting to that. After that will probably follow a short break. So that's what we've lined up. Yeah, so back to you, Jason, for the first of the exercises.
Great. So what we're going to do here quickly is just walk through two sides of the coin with respect to the SDGs. So in the packet, you see that we've articulated some kind of common articulations of the benefits of the SDG framework and some of the common critiques and limitations of that framework. So I'll just quickly walk these through, and then we're just going to have, give a little opening for folks to give their own responses about their sense of the utility and the things to keep in mind that we need to be critical about as we're engaging with this SDG framework. So as I referred to in my introduction, a prime benefit of the SDG framework is it creates this common agenda that facilitates collaboration across sectors and across different types of organizations, connects economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability, places a clear emphasis on concrete targets and outcomes and KPIs, as Angela is referring to. And it creates a sense of urgency by establishing 2030 as this really crucial deadline that we need to take action in order to achieve these goals by that in that time frame. On the flip side, we see critiques that are focused on it's literally an inversion of the positive benefits of the SDGs in the first case, so that it's because they're so comprehensive, it's kind of difficult to know where to start and how to engage, and and how to keep the sense of interconnection even while you dive into one specific domain. They're also critiqued for failing to adequately take into account the rights, interests, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples who were, of course, not formally represented in the UN, and were relatively sidelined in terms of the validation and ratification of the SDGs themselves. There's also critiques about the SDGs not going far enough to address root problems, and that there also are internal contradictions in the sense of the potential for contradictions between, say, goals around economic development and preservation of biodiversity is kind of a classic case. So that's kind of just a real quick overview. And I'm just curious if other folks have their own articulations or observations about this framework that they want to throw in at this point, and either side of the coin, or just kind of what their perspectives are on this SDG framework. Angela, you mentioned the SDGs build on the Millennium Development Goals and expanded that agenda beyond just simply poverty alleviation to this whole wide gamut of issues related to sustainable development. And I don't know if anybody wants to expand on this, but just want to give a chance for people to articulate a position and make some comments about this framework as a whole. And if we don't have any engagement at this point, that's fine. Just one more quick chance. You can also put things in chat as they occur to you as well. Just wanting to provide a little bit of an opportunity here for observations about strengths and limitations. And if not, we'll move on to the next part of the exercise, which Monica will lead us through, which is looking at the Concordia landscape.
Maybe one minor thing that I wanted to add. So I think in general, the sustainability approach, I'm not sure. I think the Human Development Index is used and maybe some of the social or economic indicators, but and sustainability in general. And I think one of the limitations is that sometimes the Human Development Index is used as a country-wide indicator, but you may have groups within the country that are not at the level. So for one example, in Suriname, which is my native country, the Human Development Indicator is at a level of, it is at I can't remember the value, but it's at a reasonably good level. But when you look at the forest communities, which includes the indigenous communities and the maroon communities, the Human Development Indicator that is way below. So I think maybe some of the indicators should, and that will maybe as well, you know, for like even for let's say vegetation indicators, that if it's used as a country-wide indicator, there should be some scale, maybe, I don't know, differentiation to see where the actual issues are happening. And right now, if you work with a country-wide Human Development Indicator, it's actually not always representing the truth. And in Canada, that's probably the same for indigenous communities.
Yeah, and that's true across different domains, in that sense of like the need for, it's often referred to as localization of those indicators is an important piece as well, of saying like, not just talking in aggregate, but in specific communities or specific geographies, what are the appropriate indicators and what are the levels of, you know, what is the situation in each of those relative contexts? You're totally right that that's really important.
I'd just add as well, one frustration I have with the SDGs is the separation of some issues, and particularly for me, I work with indigenous communities in coastal setting. So a lot of my work is about the connection between land and sea. So the separation here between life on land and life below water just is so inconsistent with Indigenous ontologies and understandings of those connections. And indeed, for us, as our understanding of how ecological systems work, those connections are so important. And yet, when it comes to things like protected areas, you know, there's one room discussing marine protected areas and setting targets, and another room with very little to do with, you know, dealing with land. That separation between land and sea is really problematic and reinforced again by the SDGs in terms of how they're organized. But so those cross-room connections really important for us to keep in mind as we go.
Good. So Monica, maybe we jump into what's happening on the Concordia landscape, and then we'll have a look at the targets.
Yeah, so Anna, if we can have the, great. So this is a sample of what's happening at Concordia. We just want to, you know, so this has been mapped out here to some degree, but you know, it's an opportunity here for us to see if we've missed anything in particular. Really, this is not trying to capture everything. We've gone for things that have high visibility, discoverability, so maybe a website associated with them or a clear program rather than course level attention to this topic. But yeah, just in terms of what we have, so many of these under the research units, we have the LSRC, obviously a key player here, and then some of the individual labs. So Pedro's there, David Lazard's, Dylan Fraser's, Emma. We probably should have. You probably have a lab that. Mine is that one on partners, the PISEV lab, Partners in Indigenous Conservation and Environmental Futures. Jochen Jaeger's there, Carly's. And then, of course, we're involved in some broader cross-institutional initiatives, such as the QCBS and Cicada. I'm not actually familiar with the Forest Studies Center. Emma, are you aware of that one?
Mildly, I know it exists. I don't know much about it.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have checked that one. And then in terms of, you know, the academic programs are the well represented within geography and GPE. We have that new MILIS finally, the major in leadership in sustainability, which will be BA program. And that really exciting initiative there, the Indigenous land-based education program, and you'll have seen there a couple of months ago, we got, there was about $500,000 from the Chimandi Foundation, family, a Montreal-based family, to support this 15 credit micro program for Indigenous and non-Indigenous students to really explore land connections, land rights, climate change, food sovereignty issues. Donna Goodley very much associated with the leadership of that. So that's an exciting development at Concordia. And then there's some additional, some of these in the column to the right, very much related to research as well. Environmental humanities there, Jill Didder being very much the person behind that. Carly's tree inventory, we have that there. I don't know if anyone just notices any omissions or you've got any suggestions for what we might add to that on a similar scale or larger.
You mean in terms of things that are already happening?
Yeah, around life on land, like particular initiatives at the the scale of a research group or a research unit, or a program, or any other initiatives? This is something too that, if things occur to you, you could pop it in the chat or be in touch with us.
The Sustainability Action Fund, that falls.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, we could be more explicit about the actual action plan, because clearly they're.
Oh, the Concordia Campus Master Plan falls under that.
Yeah, but I think we could be more explicit about some of the particular action plans.
Well, I mean, there are other research labs in ecology in the biology department.
Yeah,
Like terrestrial ecosystems. So I don't know if that.
yeah. And there are a couple in geography as well, that like Pascal's lab. And I see, Pedro, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so one of the things when I was going for this, I think we really need to do a good exercise to recognize or to sort of map, what we have in terms of not only labs, but people that would be interested in participating in this in a more active way. And this to me is sort of the second thing that I would like to add. So the mapping is really important. The other day, someone, and I'm sure we could do this. We just need to spend maybe month or a couple months really, because the important thing often, at least I feel in general with academics, is better that we consider them and they opt out than we don't consider them, they will not opt in. That's sort of a more typical behavior that I find in academics, since we were speaking about, people at Concordia. So it's better to be broad, and then people say, no, sorry, I really don't work on this. Then maybe you don't, not consider people. So the mapping would be important. The second thing I think we should do, and I think Concordia is a great place to do this sort of work, is really, for instance, one of the things I've been interested in, I started developing, is a map of economic opportunities, across Quebec with climate change and fisheries. So this is very multidisciplinary because involve people in tourism, would involve people in policy, would involve people in economics, and it goes. And the other thing and I started this project a few years kind of thinking, and then I kind of got stuck because I would really like to work with people at Concordia, just not sure, yet, since I'm, 5 years and a half, I think I'm at Concordia, I'm starting to learn a lot about the environment, but it'll be, so I think we need to create an environment where we know who are interested in the expertises, but also not so much maybe seed. I mean, I like the idea of those seed grants to start multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. I think that could be an interesting thing, but this may take too long. So and also create sort of Monica, you and I spoke about this, but this could work well here too. Create a dynamic sort of a conversation board. Can't remember the name that we often use for those, but where we create one specific for this, and where people start thinking about kinds of things they would like to participate, how they could get involved. But I think those are my general comments for now.
Thanks, Pedro. That's a great, and it's interesting. Just yesterday, we had yet another step in terms of exploring proposal for an incubator, which would really be focused on convening and supporting interdisciplinary research around sustainability. So this is an initiative coming out of the LSRC, but with support from a wider group of researchers in sustainability. Mm-hmm. And there's now a pretty coherent proposal to support that idea. So this incubator, which isn't different from a research institute in terms of it really being a support for other research institutes and researchers, providing training, but more in terms of the convening space, which I think is really what you were underscoring there.
Yeah, and then my last point, I mean, we obviously all want to participate, make a difference, and so on. But in my experience, doing this for, thinking a lot about these issues, I feel that when I read the SDGs in general, one of the things that will be very important to keep in mind is all these actions need to have, I'm almost, it needs to have policy involved. There are two broad strokes for, at least for people at my level in terms of biodiversity. Sure, I can work on conservation and management at very tiny little scales that, can have some local, positive impacts, for lack of a better word. But when you think about the SDGs, they do have, their goal. We're not going to meet those goals by amalgamating, small actions all together. They need to be a bit more large scale actions, and those large scale actions to me involve policy. In my mind, there's almost no way around not involving policy. And so I feel that whatever in directions we go, we need to really put research around that helps to improve and build policies. And I think we need to start finding that expertise very quickly within Concordia to help us to become actors, but effective actors, but also meaningful actors at that level where the SDGs. And this is in terms of research, right? That's
and certainly that is one of the ideas really motivating this incubator, this idea of an impact incubator. How do we support not just research as we know it, but really advancing research, pushing it out there, getting the whole knowledge mobilization, that engagement with other partners, which is very consistent with the SDG, the attention given to partnerships. But to have some mechanism, or to have a kind of vehicle that would provide more support for that impact piece, and obviously policy central to that.
Yeah. The other thing too, in my experience, if you allow me, I mean, I participate in lots and lots and lots of projects. The ones that are more successful in my mind, and I measure success not only by end products, but also the engagement of people in participating in those projects and so on, are the ones that are clearly cut very close to the expertise of the people involved. And, sort of having someone at the top thinking about a big idea and then trying to find, you could fit well, and you could kind of, but then, yeah, I could, but it would take me a year just to, develop the necessary, framework for me to contribute to this. Whereas if it's something that is so, very close. So one of the things that we often do in my discussion groups these days is that we spend actually the first 3 hours, say we're spending a week together, let's say the first week where we're going to develop some of those more large scale involving lots of different disciplines, is that people actually bring their papers, and we start putting stories together around the papers that we have published already, because if we have published, it means that we are very close to that expertise already, right? And so what I'm trying to say here, I'm not saying this is the perfect recipe, but maybe create an infrastructure where we have expertise of actually putting people together to work, and that expertise exists. I mean, sometimes we hire people that run the workshops for us. They are not experts in the workshop, but there are people that really know how to run, to manage people and expertise. And I think we should map this. Maybe we already have a Concordia. If not, we could, maybe source out. There are lots of experts around that.
Sure. Sure, if anybody else wanted to come in on this, Jason, particularly, in terms of the response to the mapping, because we've had a lot of discussion about the mapping and how to do that and how to avoid tagging and just the engagement with people in terms of whether they are actually taking on SDGs rather than just, there's some happy coincidence with the themes of the SDGs. But Jason, you've thought more about this and done more.
Oh, first of all, I just want to say that what you see in the participant guide is there's no claims to comprehensiveness and to adequacy of what's represented there. It's really kind of an off the cuff, a quick scan, what's kind of most visible, etc. And I guess the other comment I would make about going further with that kind of mapping is I think it needs to be done in relation to a specific agenda or goal or objective, as opposed to just done for the sake of having a comprehensive view, because you can invest tons of time in mapping exercises, and then you don't create value because you didn't have a specific objective for doing that. So if we're going to go further in a particular domain, we really have to establish what's our purpose here, what are we trying to accomplish, what are we trying to build, and hopefully maybe some of the ideas that we pursue later on in the conversation, or the conversation about targets, will help us to establish a little bit more clearly what some possible agendas might be that we could use as the reason to do the kind of more comprehensive mapping. But yeah, in essence, though, we're also trying to avoid what Monica said, just simply tagging existing work with the SDGs and saying, look how much we're contributing. The point isn't just to do that kind of facile, kind of symbolic exercise. It's really to figure out where do we have the potential to have the most impact as an institution, given our relevant expertise, as Pedro was saying, rather than trying to establish some high level goal and find people who might fit and contribute to that goal. It's really to figure out what we have and what we have the potential to do together, to do better together, to go further.
If I can maybe just touch on that as well. I'd absolutely agree with Pedro that where we need to go is policy. And in Canada, that means, federal, provincial, and municipal levels. So if we just get back to this question of green spaces management, the Loyola campus is not a leader now within the Côte-des-Neiges NDG borough. Matter of fact, boroughs passing legislation that, we're not actually respecting right now, and we're going to have to change because that level is moving faster than we are. So I think a lot of academics, that engagement with policy is very hard because we have this feeling that we need to be objective. And we're unfortunately in a political climate where science is seen as partisan and not objective. And I think that's an obstacle we face, and perhaps one we need help with.
Yeah, and I don't think we get adequate recognition for policy work when we do it. So there's that piece as well that needs to be addressed, and that's something that is happening now at Concordia. There is a reassessment of research excellence in terms of what are the criteria, what should we be looking at when we think about research excellence.
Angela, do you have any policy-related engagements, or do you see potential for that in your work? Oh, maybe she stepped away.
Well, sorry, was it for me, the question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear my name in your question. Yeah, so actually I do work with Agriculture Canada. I started to work with them since my postdoc, and I continue working with them. And a lot of my work with them actually involves working towards either towards policies or towards development of agriculture practices. Because their work is very, well, the department that I work with there, it's basically using Earth observation for crop monitoring and management. And so a lot of their work is really focusing on creating indicators and working with development of really research that looks at agriculture practices that are beneficial to the environment. So I know I recently started to look more at the policies part with them. It's not the most fun part I find, but I think it's critical to include it somehow, because it kind of makes our I think it makes the research at the end valuable to us, the humans and the environment, I think.
And actually, I'm not sure if Elias is there, but I mean, I'd be interested to know to what extent engineers are engaging in policy. I know your research area is a little bit outside of this one, but in terms of that suggestion about the focus and the need for us to engage more around policy, do you feel that that is something engineers in general are more conscious of, or?
Well, this is a good question, because kind of engineer, actually, we have a push from one side from the society, okay, but push also from the government from an economic point of view. Okay, and this is where it's problematic. And usually as engineers, we are not definitely trained actually to consider, we are trained to consider policies in our work, okay? But we are not actually trained to work, if you want, on changing existing policies, so the policies that we consider are strictly limited actually to the policies that can impact our work as engineers. So we don't see, maybe some people do, but actually we don't really see beyond this. So we are still, unfortunately, like in this framework of power generation and energy and so on. So you said it correctly last time, Monica, also, is that at Concordia, in engineering, we have the Center for Engineering and Society, and they bring a lot of added value. And this is actually like a center that it's completely unique. And when we have accreditation, so for our engineering programs, so several visitors actually are quite impressed by the existence of the CES, and specifically because most of the professors in CES are not engineers. So it's really like specialists in the field, philosophers, policymakers who teach engineers those aspects, and it's brilliant. Actually, it's a brilliant idea.
I'll have to think about policy-related expertise in the CES. I'm trying to think through individuals I know in those units and their work, but that would be an interesting exploration. Michael, go ahead, Pedro.
Sorry, Jason. But also policy goes, I feel that we need to include that also as part of the curriculum. I'm not very, right? So I think we need to start training students to think about policy from the get-go if they want to do something that is meaningful. I mean, Em and I and many others, we often have the students, we want to change the world. We want to really participate in the conversations. We want to make our science meaningful. But, and then many years of doing that, really, this goes through policy. And so now I try to get my students involved into, find workshops, bring expertise. I organized a couple of workshops in the past few years on bringing folks that are, policy experts from DFO or Environment Canada. I mean, sometimes you need to go out and find expertise, but this needs to be, in my views, needs to be something that, the undergrad students are already kind of, feeling comfortable with the idea of their knowledge to how to sort of communicate knowledge in which can be more directly and approachable to policy. And that's not something many scientists even know how to do it, right?
And I think, you know, one very good opportunity that we haven't made enough use of is the Canadian Science Policy Conference, the CSPC, that Concordia has now become a partner with. And that's an opportunity. They have that annual conference in the fall. Great opportunity for some of our researchers to really directly interact with government and, you know, talk about funding and other opportunities. So that is one that should be much more on our radar. But I agree about curriculum, and hopefully the MILIS, this new major, that could be a component of it. But it's something that we really need to be much more conscious of, particularly around conservation. Huge opportunity to influence through policy. Emma?
I was just going to say, if we're talking about curriculum, I don't know if we're going there now.
Sure.
If we are, I know there was this talk of sustainability content in all curricula. And I think that's something that's important here in terms of life on land. I think in particular in relation to what the gentleman who spoke, Elias, the engineer, had said, that, you know, yes, we are training people who are biodiversity experts, but if all these other people we are training in, you know, engineering and commerce and humanities and so forth, also in their undergraduate time, learn to have that connection with nature and learn a little bit about the value of nature, they'll carry that through their entire lives. And it'll position them much better to be able to be thinking in the context of, you know, protecting life. So I think our teaching for non-ecologists is really important too. And whether it's service courses or requiring a certain biodiversity content in every program, or also some of these informal things that are happening on campus. So like the City Farm School and ways where people can learn, not necessarily only through their curricula, are possibly have a very large impact. You know, and all our students who are not majoring in biodiversity.
But also,
sorry.
Yeah, no, Pedro, go first. Yeah.
Well, you know, Emma, I think so. Even within people that work, you know, on questions such as, you know, life on land, it's interesting that we do have perspectives, and I think different perspectives, and I think curriculum needs to cover many of those different perspectives. Many folks are interested in conservation. I'm very interested in conservation as a citizen, but as a scientist, my research tends to go more towards management. So it's, you know, management of biodiversity resources and not exploration, literally management. And so particularly because I come from a fisheries background, in terms of training. So in fisheries, management is a huge part, and management touches on, you know, other aspects, including engineering, including, you know, business and so on, and also touches on communities. And there's conservation also aspects in management. But I think we need a curriculum that really, you know, not only speaks about the different aspects of life on land, but we also need different curriculums of flavors that some students, oh, okay, I really like this, more of the managed perspective than conservation. Oh, I really like the conservation rather than the managed perspective, or in other perspectives, right? But we need to give that flavor. I find management is actually very actionable. I participate in a lot of work with governments at the provincial and federal level for management of fisheries mostly, but I don't, and interesting enough, I don't see that curriculum very covered in many of the programs that are trying to do touch on those aspects. But there are many other aspects too, but just, you know, keep open.
But I think there's two things. There's both what we are training students within our own field, but also, you know, there's 30,000 some students in completely other fields who
I agree.
Get at least a little flavor of learning about life on land.
Yeah, I agree. But the point is exactly what I was trying to say. Conservation is not always the most enticing for
No,
those other
maybe not
30,000. There are other aspects such as management and the idea of sustainable economical development through adaptation of life on land and economic perspectives and so on. Biologists tend to shy away from those perspectives, but I think we need in a modern society to bring those to curriculum.
Yeah, and I didn't say conservation, but perhaps a little bit of natural history should be part of one of those everybody just needs to know.
I agree.
And there's a handout.
Quickly, I would just add, stewardship is really important because much of the land in Canada, it's Indigenous land. So in terms of having our students being able to have conversations with traditional owners, it's really important that they're thinking stewardship, not just management. Elias?
Well, just thank you, Monica. So just a comment on what Emma actually was mentioned. So regarding the curriculum, I guess the biggest challenge now is that we are still following, like the same structure, which is like expertise are separated. Okay, so you have mechanical engineers as a department, you have civil engineers, and so on. And this, which is completely different now for our own students. Our own students cannot learn basically or be really like limited to a certain expertise. I give you an example. This is something when I teach thermodynamics too. So a big part of the class is energy production, and one of the systems, so steam power cycles. So I explained the cycle from thermodynamic point of view and so on, but then I say, you know what, for cooling and so on, you need the liquid, and then you end up throwing this enormous actual amount of water at 45 degrees C in a lake or in a river. And this is where I hit, if you want, basically my limitation. So I have no expertise in ecology or something else to go beyond this. Typically, I will always say, well, fishes don't like probably to swim in 45 degrees C, but this is what's missing. And I think that actually having more knowledge, more expertise, or people with more expertise will have a bigger impact. But you see how to make those connections. We can't make them because we are separated. Okay, so like the departments, biology, ecology, you guys are Loyola, we are in EV building. And it's just like we have to mix all those people in order to have discussions, the same that we are having here. And therefore, to improve the curriculum.
That's great. The value of interdisciplinarity and the importance of collaboration. Yeah, thanks, Elias.
If I can maybe add to that, that's maybe where some of the lessons we learned in the pandemic about flipped classroom teaching might come in handy. Because someone from our department could maybe prepare a 15-minute recorded mini lecture on that and then give it to people in engineering who could then run with it. Rather than having to invite someone in every year, there might be a way to use some of those kind of, new teaching tools.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I was just going to put a marker down too. Sorry, was somebody else going to jump in?
No, I was just going to bring this to a close. No, go, Jason.
Just very quickly, I think that's a super there's some rich thing to mine there in terms of what are the kind of enabling structures for that kind of mixing that we want to see, and how do we integrate that into curriculum? I like to just note that and maybe circle back to that, but I think probably we want to take a quick break first. We'll do a very quick exercise in examining the SDG targets to maybe help us refine a little bit. We've had some great, the focus on policy, the potential for curriculum work. We have some great raw material here to work with in terms of ideas of where we might go, what we might do. The targets may help us focus a little bit in what are the specific domains that we think we have the potential to intervene in and the relevant expertise for. And then that may help focus us a little bit in the last part of the conversation. So I'm going to suggest, Monica, we just do our quick break before we do the review of the targets. being that it's already 10 after 11. We'll do a quick poll when people get back about which of these targets we think are most relevant, and then really dive further into some particular ideas that we might center our thinking around with respect to life on land.
Yeah, so I guess a short break, if we can be back for, I don't know, 11:16 or something. That's a 5-minute break, sorry, short, but we'll wrap up on time at noon.
All right, let's see everybody in 5. Great, welcome back, folks. Let's see, looks like Emma's still away. Pedro, I don't know if are you still there, Pedro? Maybe he's not back yet. Maybe while we're waiting for the two of them to return, I'm curiously asked, I mean, there was a great suggestion about recorded content that you can integrate into courses. I'm curious if there are other things more ambitious or more structural that you think could be done to facilitate that kind of mixing and complementarity between disciplinary expertise in terms of how that integrates into curriculum.
Well, not really. The thing is that I guess my point at this stage is that, you know, we had like, well, I guess we're still officially in a pandemic. So that, but we are not making use properly of all actually the 100 or 1,000 of hours of the recorded lectures. So, and you see they are sitting mostly in hard drives and then nobody will be using them in the future. So, for example, I know like in our department, what we decided to do, and it was a pilot. So we are like the thermofluids group, okay? So thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. And then we said, you know what? I'm teaching thermodynamics 1 and thermodynamics 2, but then I have my course is a prereq actually for other upper level courses. And I have like all those recorded lectures and so on. So then what we did is that we asked the professors teaching, let's say 400 high level courses, what do you need? Okay, what are the parts of thermodynamics 1 and 2 that you need? And then they came up with the list. And then what we did is that we picked exactly those portions of the course, and then we put them on a channel. So, and then, so therefore the students can go and say, well, prereq, like review all this, okay, before your course. So, and it will be probably like to do the same thing for what we have discussed. So this year, I invited people from CES to my lecture. I invited also people from social justice in my lecture. But it's true, like Emma is right, is that, you know, it takes a full lecture, okay? So when, and it's interesting because you have lengths, okay? So the person actually, so in social justice was speaking about entropy, which is like thermodynamics, right? And this is exactly what I like, is that when the students will see also like the concepts that we are discussing in class, second law of thermodynamics and so on, but apply to something different. Pedro had a comment on this, let's say on STEM and mathematics, when you see them apply to other fields, okay? So it would be wonderful to find a way, I don't know, like if maybe it's to see with so Center for Teaching and Learning to have like a program where like we can, let's say, if I identify something that I consider important in my lecture and I don't have the expertise, and this is not necessarily related to engineering, so then I can ask, for example, a professor, as Emma said, okay, like, can you record 15 minutes to describe this to my student? And then during my lecture, we say, okay, like now, well, excuse me, I will just shut up. It's not my expertise. Here is the expert. And that's
cool. And Angela, you want to jump in?
Yes, actually, just adding to something that Leah said. It would be interesting to have some kind of support from the CTL to help us create also videos. Like during the pandemic, CTL, well, actually it was more Concordia. They kind of helped me to create 2 very short videos, 5-6 minutes, that kind of condensed the entire lecture of 40 minutes and in a very nice way. Like I still had to talk, which was really boring to listen to my own voice, but maybe there are other ways to, it was very efficient. And it would be great to have that continuous access. It's not available anymore. I asked about it, but that would be a great thing to have access to.
Cool, noted. Yeah, we'll see if we can do some follow-up on that and figure out what the opportunities are. I mean, we have all kinds of rabbit holes that we could potentially dive down. There is something we want to accomplish here, because we've done this with all of other rooms, And that is to really weigh in on the UN targets that have been articulated for SDG 15. And we approach this in two ways. One is we approach it as just taking these at face value and identifying which of these we think we have the most to contribute to or the most relevant for us as a university, because we have to remember these were articulated for at the country level in terms of aggregate indicators. And then we want to flip the script and say, okay, if we were articulating our own targets related to life on land, what would they be coming out of our own institutional context? So what we're going to do here, you can see there's 12. If you can't see them very well, you can either enlarge your screen there or look at the packet that we circulated in advance of the meeting. And what we want you to do is we're going to put up a poll. We're going to ask you to pick 3 out of these 12 that you think are most relevant to Concordia as a university, or that we have the most to contribute to as an institution, just given kind of the range of expertise and the labs and the initiatives that we have going on as an institution. So pick 3. And then we'll look at what people's picks were and see if that helps us identify how we can really kind of start to frame and focus our efforts around life on land. And then we'll pick back up with particular ideas that we might undertake. Yeah, Emma, it's very true. It's in a way, I mean, part of what we're trying to get you to experience here is a bit of this frustration with those targets as they're articulated. We're just kind of taking them at face value. If we were to pick a couple that we think are kind of like the ones that we could say are our focus, but then we'll have a chance to kind of like kind of have an open articulation of what we think are relevant ways to articulate targets that we have the most to contribute to. Yeah. I want to tag for discussion that living lab idea as well, because that's come up in a few other conversations we've been part of, either both in 17 rooms and as part of a discussion about the sustainability living lab, which is currently actually activated and is thinking about version 2 of itself. So have folks had a chance to weigh in? Anybody need a little bit more time? Okay, let's see, what do we have here? Deforestation and degraded forests. Well, I have to open this window up a little bit further to see all the results. Let's see. We have 3 at 100%. Good, I missed that. So deforestation, integrate ecosystem and biodiversity. So this is the 15.9 is really the policy focus, and conserve and sustainably use ecosystem and biodiversity. Yeah, good. And then some others are kind of 50%. Anybody, Emma, do you want to talk through your frustration in trying to select just 3 out of these range of interconnected kind of targets, or anybody else want to comment on what they chose, why they chose it, or what, make a case for one of the items that was less than 100% endorsed?
Well, it's just these things are, one of the ways you protect ecosystems is by preventing invasive species. And by ending deforestation, and by ending desert, ending deforestation is protecting forest ecosystems, and ending desertification is protecting arid land ecosystems. So,
yeah.
So I would see it more in a sectorial way, that like as a university, what we do is we teach. And so one thing we can do is make sure we're making an impact by really practical teaching of telling the next generation of people that this is a big deal and it should be on their radar. And by research, and by serving the community, which includes outreach, but also policy.
Yeah.
And whether we're talking about policy in terms of forest management or invasive species and freshwater ecosystems, in both cases, what we're doing is policy.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on the exercise of trying to identify areas of focus through the SDG targets?
I would just say that, Emma, your last point really connects to your earlier point about NGOs, because NGOs often have very good connections to government and can do that piece that we don't do so well. So those kind of partnerships are really productive.
Yeah, and I've been really struck in working with NGOs how there's complementarity, that there's things that to us are obvious and easy, and they're resources they don't have.
So I'm curious if folks don't have any more comments on the UN targets per se. I'm curious. We'll just take a couple quick minutes here. If you were to like clean slate articulate your own targets along the lines of what the UN has produced here for a university, for Concordia, in relation to life on land, does this at all spur you to thinking about a kind of localized articulation of a target that we as a university might identify around this subject? Is that a useful thing to think through? What might we establish as, if we were to articulate our own target related to life on land, how would we articulate that? What would that be? I'm just curious if anybody has, if that spurs anybody's thinking at all. And if not, we'll give ourselves the rest of the session to really dive into what are specific undertakings and ideas that we'd want to pursue.
I mean, I don't want to be monopolizing, but I think I'd maybe reiterate that we might have a target of teaching people to value terrestrial ecosystems, including people who are not in this field. We can also be supporting researchers in our field who are in this field and who are interacting at the broader level. And then we could also be...
Sorry, Emma, not only terrestrial, I hope.
Yeah, well, life on land, you know.
I don't think they meant life on land as just terrestrial.
Okay. So yeah. And then maybe using our green space as a living lab and as a practice place for developing and showcasing best practices for supporting life on land in this particular context of, an urban campus, which is a pretty small context. It's not, forests and deserts and everything else, but it's the land that we own. Mm-hmm. So maybe we need to be stewarding it as well as we can,
Start at home, so to speak.
Yeah, another action too, I feel in my former university at UCOM, we really had a very strong engagement with communities around us. Mm-hmm. And maybe we do have, I haven't discovered yet at Concordia or more particularly Loyola, but one of the things many of my students used to organize, for instance, special days celebrating biodiversity, or do walks around the city with community members that are interested in discovering how cities connect with biodiversity and so on. So that's sort of something meaningful because it's not difficult at all to do. And so those small little actions that I think it links well our, academic community with other communities could be also interesting and bring, maybe obviously indigenous perspectives into it, I'm sure we can find a way.
Yeah, super interesting, Pedro. To me, if we think about how do we, if we frame the question as how can we be more impactful, the policy domain, I see the kind of logic of if we give some emphasis to policy work, there's kind of an impact story that you can make clear. How do we generate that sense of impact around community engagement activities and the kinds of things that I'm just wondering about how can we keep the notion of impact really central to our thinking about what we might do? And
yeah, one of the things, Jason, I mean, might be different experience from Emma, Angela, Monica, and others that, you know, have boots on the ground, so to speak, with life on land, in the water, in my case. Water is on land. But I feel often that lack of engagement is because it's lack of knowledge. A lot of people, you would be shocked and surprised how a lot of people don't think about these issues. And most of these issues are lost. Now, for the first time, you see policy briefs for politicians speaking on biodiversity and ecosystems and services and so on. This is happening in the past 5 to 10 years. It didn't happen before. And so I feel that communication of knowledge is an important task of universities. But, you know, I think policy doesn't have, you know, you can have indirect policies to have direct policies into life on land or biodiversity and ecosystem services and so on. So for instance, CJAP now is changing their curriculum that went through policy for Ministry of Education, that people now are more aware of, you know, there is, that was the idea of the book, right, Monica? So the sustainability sort of to be permeated in secondary and CJAP levels, for instance. So I feel Concordia can, actually this idea that people need to be aware to even understand and to even feel that that is an important part. That's what actually policy in some ways starts happening, is that politicians are choosing policies based on what their constituents think and find important. But if their constituents are not aware of many of those issues, that's not something that might happen. And then the politician is not going to push this. So there is this connection between constituents, politicians, and then I think academics can play a vital role in knowledge dissemination for what is important to be considered under policy. And so using policy as a language to push conversations with communities.
And NGO connections there are central as well.
And it depends on the NGO, right? So there's all kinds of NGOs. I mean, there's small ones that they're not interested in that, but they're like, I work quite a lot with Duxie Limited, which is a major North American NGO that have real consequences to policy, for instance. And they come from hunters. Literally, it's called Ducks Limited because it's the hunting, the duck hunters in North America that put themselves together. And, you know, no kidding. I mean, literally, they today have a lot of influence in policy, not for ducks only, for life on land.
An important part of the policy piece, too, is just communicating our research in accessible terms and in accessible places, right?
But also use examples. One of the things I don't see researchers in my area doing often, and the reason I started doing more is because I was I was curious, but we don't know actually how to see the potential. We don't know how to articulate our own science into policy, potential for policy.
Yeah.
I think it's an important exercise to even go back to our papers that we wrote 10, 15 years ago and see how policy evolved. And you can actually see how historically, somehow, many of us we're actually evolving around those points, but we as academics don't recognize that. So that could be also an interesting exercise.
There was recently a lot of coverage of the fact that Quebec does not have any policy in place for decommissioning of roads, particularly logging roads. And when you think of the work that even is done at Concordia, you know, Jochen Jaeger, I'm thinking of particularly around fragmentation of landscapes. I mean, there's some really obvious areas that we could be directly contributing to.
Yeah, so Johan, for instance, he's not here. I know he's on sabbatical, but he, you know, a lot of the policy that came from Quebec, and not his work definitely benefited many of these policies, but overpass and green passage and so on. This is today almost low-hanging fruit.
Mm.
You know, covers for streams and fish passages, right? This is even more low-hanging fruit. I mean, policy for covers and the needs for them to be installed in streams and lakes, for instance, this is around for 30, 40 years. For roads is more recent, but yeah, this is a good example, right? Where, you know, what are the policies out there, kind of a map, and how, you know, our research even relates to those things. And often we don't see, oh, my research could have it being used for that.
But what are some of the barriers to that? Why isn't it happening more?
Again, I don't know. Emma may give some perspective. And obviously Angela and others, but my perspective is there's a huge change in the way people that work on, you know, issues of life on land, biodiversity, and ecosystem services, and so on. When I started to be trained, conservation management, all these things were not part of the conversation at all, zero. And so I think, you know, many people like me, we got really kind of interested. And although I keep most of my science still very, you know, sort of, you know, rooted in my origins, but some people just don't see themselves getting involved. They don't think themselves as people that are, you know, boots on the ground kind of action. They don't want to, I don't know. There are many different views. That itself is an important conversation, by the way. I don't know what Emma, I would be curious to know what Emma.
I think there's a lot of things. Like Monica, as you said, you know, we're rewarded for publishing. We're not necessarily rewarded for doing policy work. We're trained how to publish. So we're taught how to write a scientific paper and how to go through the peer review process and so on. We're not trained how to do this policy work. And we do have this very kind of limited view of success, and this is what I need to do to be successful. And these other things are like, I don't know how to do them. I probably wouldn't succeed if I tried. And I think there's this idea of objectivity that, you know, as a scientist, and it's one I kind of struggle with, that clearly, you know, when I'm teaching, I shouldn't be talking about my own political views. But then saying that we're in a biodiversity crisis is not a political view, it's a fact. So, and then, you know, teaching is one particular power relationship, but maybe interacting with policy is different, where I can be more outspoken, and where are those limits? And we don't get any training or guidance to do how to do any of that.
Is that a gap? What would fill that gap in your mind, Emma, in terms of what, given the constraints and the potential barriers to faculty thinking and working that way, what could be some things that would help to break down that barrier? And is it training? Is it facilitation in terms of having kind of policy liaison roles that are created that do that research to policy bridging? I'm just curious if you have ideas, you or others, about how could we be more impactful in the policy domain? Yeah.
Pedro, you might know about this. It's my understanding that Liber Aero postdocs are getting kind of experience and training in working with policy.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. They are, but I would say not
so
only.
I don't know what it is they're getting, but that seems like something cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Which postdocs?
Liber Arrow. They're postdocs in it's a
conservation in conservation.
Oh,
I
okay.
wrote it in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
So they're obviously, much younger than I am. But.
Yeah, jump in, Elias and Angela. Elias first, maybe.
Angela was first. I just clicked.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I thought you were first, but it's actually just to actually say that I kind of agree with what Emma and Pedro have mentioned up to now. It's that I think the system of acknowledgement that exists at a university should be changed, because we are heavily working on research publications, and if the acknowledgement isn't there for other things, then we won't divest our energies into other ways, because it's not being acknowledged, it's not being counted for. It's heavy work, and if it's not being seen, then I think that from the university side has to maybe be adjusted to this reality.
Good. And by the way, Monica mentioned some earlier this committee work that she's involved, that's just getting off the ground right now. That's going to try to, I think that will be part of your scope, right, Monica? Is that how do we do this recognition to really value the things that we want to appropriately value as an institution, and this policy engagement, advocacy, community engagement is really central to that. Yes.
Well, actually, I look at this from a different angle, in the sense that here I'm trying to connect two things, like policies and also what Monica and Pedro mentioned regarding communication and science communication. I think like maybe one way is not really like to look at, okay, how we will rapidly, if you want, end up with professors and scientists, researchers, changing like impact and policy. It's, you start by saying, you know what, okay, let's promote the research internally, okay, and externally, like more communication, okay? So, and therefore what you end up with more researchers, like on different committees, and all those things are valued, right? Those are things we put on our CCV, right? So then they're invited, then they end up on the news, and so they are considered our experts, and then they end up on those committees, will make decisions and policies. And therefore, like you have a chain of, if you want, on things that are valued by the peers. And this is how actually you reach probably this point. Now specifically regarding like policies and politics, it's maybe also like, I guess, for some scientists, like politicians are looked at like the devil. Okay, so this is, maybe I'll throw like something controversial here actually, but it's exactly actually the case of Stephen Guilbeault. It's a good case for me, because this is somebody who is an activist and so on. And then I think at a certain moment, he made this decision and say, you know what, the only way to make a change or to make it effectively is actually to change the policy. So now basically in the government, he has to deal with things that maybe he's not in phase with, but it's always like this balance maybe between, okay, like I'm more effective, I'm more efficient actually by changing, by taking the lead and changing than staying behind the scenes. But this is an engineer without any expertise speaking.
So you're suggesting a training program for faculty to run for office? Is that what you're suggesting, Elias?
I'm suggesting a revolution.
Angela, do you have your hand up, or was that from previously?
It's already
okay.
passed.
Pedro, jump in.
Yeah, I want to go back to a point that Angela made, and I think a lot of us, I mean, one of the things that, how Concordia can sort of sometimes, how can we set Concordia to be different, which is also an important thing, right? So we want to build we want to showcase the university. And one of the things often is also certain types of recognitions. And what Emma was saying is very true. I mean, we're trying to kind of write papers and to be meaningful that way. If you notice now, NSERC just changed a little bit of their views that they will recognize, for instance, interviews and outreach as part of development. So that is great. And I'm shocked that universities haven't done that. We needed to wait actually to the funding agencies, which tend to be so much more conservative in so many ways than particularly comprehensive universities like ours. So I think it's time also to create and maybe review some of our ways about promotion and that incorporates that. So for instance, I'm not saying we should be doing this, but when you go to departments of music and sometimes even theater, some of the academics there don't even have PhDs. And the reason is because it's not the path. The path is to be, musicians that are participating, they're engaged. There's a lot of, for instance, the policymaker or DFO, Roland Savard, who retired 10 years ago, didn't have a PhD. He was the boss of policymaking for DFO for many, many decades. So I think we need to start thinking ways in which the university also recognize. So, and sometimes the university, by making stands on promotion and views, we had the other discussion the other day, for instance, about open science. Elias was there. What I tried to push this for the union, but to make that the appropriate conservation and management of data resources and knowledge should be even part of our collective agreement, and things like that. And so unions of universities have power, administration have power, but we could also think about that periphery, how to have an impact and really try to think how we're going to find even expertise in the future that wants to be engaged. Right. But by keeping sort of our medieval ways in terms of training and promotion might not be always the best way. So I think universities have a place. And often we see lots of this, this university, first one to do this and that creates this wave of change across different universities. So I feel that maybe we want to have one or two interesting big ideas that could really create a wave of change, and that also helps Concordia to kind of create and to showcase the institution federally, right? In that regards, and it could align with SDGs. I don't know, open two positions that are targeted on policy of SDGs. I don't know, something like that. But that could really, I think, go a long way, or change promotion levels for engagement of a community or policy participation, and so on, right?
Well, if you have any other ideas for making a big splash in this space, send us either during the conversation here or send us an email after, Pedro, because I think those are the kind of things we're trying to unearth about how, what are things that are both substantial and also notable that we can do to really demarcate ourselves and to set a path for ourselves as an institution that really speaks to the urgency of our situation in the world and our intentions and our values as an institution, both. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to do just a very quick kind of like summary of my key takeaways, and then let folks fill in gaps, things that you think we haven't paid enough attention to, or that we also want to keep in mind. So I'm really hearing three potential main areas of emphasis with respect to life on land and other SDG areas as well. And that is around this kind of policy interventions and training and capacity as an institution to be more influential in that space. Number one, with some examples, I'll look up to the Liber Aero postdoc training and other things that we have. I mean, we've offered faculty training in kind of public communications, but nothing really in the policy space that I know of, and that might be an interesting avenue to explore. A second area is around curriculum, and Emma's talked about the possibility of establishing targets around teaching related to land and life on land and water, biodiversity, etc. We've talked about kind of shared resources, open education resources, recorded lectures, ways for faculty to draw on other expertise across the institution. Emma, you mentioned also living, I think it was you who mentioned the living lab model, and I'd like to actually earmark that to circle back to. So curriculum as a second major potential domain for intervention related to life on land. And then also, and this kind of maybe intersects a little bit with curriculum, but our work on our own campus, so campus green spaces and our own practices as an institution related to land and biodiversity and other natural resources, I think is a third kind of domain where we have the potential to take some action. Anybody want to add anything to that list or build on anything that's there? And then Emma, also interested to hear more about this living lab structure and how you could see this potentially getting some legs and becoming something that's substantive as a thing that Concordia does. Yeah, sorry, Elias, I didn't see your hand.
No problem. Just a comment regarding, we discussed the curriculum, and I'm just actually wondering how much we know about the coverage in terms of SDGs in our curriculum. So, and then I was wondering, should we start kind with a pilot and we pick courses or whatever? I was just thinking, let's say my own courses. We do this in engineering because we have again, accreditation, and then we have graduate attributes. So we like actually to see the skills that our undergraduate students actually will gain during the training, but we have nothing related to SDGs. So I'm just wondering maybe if we can have a list of different courses, and then we have a map. Let's say thermodynamics 1 and 2, does it map actually? I'm just throwing a question. I don't know. Well, I don't know. So this is why I have to look for the answer. And then and you see, if we do it for different courses, so then ultimately we will have a clear view on how our curriculum is actually aligned with the SDGs. And then obviously we'll see the deficiencies. So then we will see that, for example, in engineering, we are covering some actual SDGs, but maybe not all of them, and therefore maybe we can fill the gaps.
Yeah, there's some a couple great examples of a few institutions that have really gone all in on the SDGs that have done, I don't know if it's been comprehensively across campus or in a few key faculties, have done that really deep assessment down to the level of assignments, which is which assignments are building what skills relative to what particular SDGs. It's a lot of work. But if there's an interest and a commitment to doing that thinking, I think that's a great, amazing idea.
Well, we can get started probably with a couple of courses, and we see actually where we can go with this.
Yeah.
One idea, if I could just quickly put it out there, is to use the performance evaluation to give people an opportunity to self-identify the SDGs that they're working with. Just reaction to that. Does that seem like a good idea?
Good for me.
I mean, it might be at risk of what Pedro said, of saying, okay, here's the stuff I do. Now let me look at all the SDGs and see which one I can make sound like it fits with what I'm already doing.
Yeah, the tagging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that as a risk as well.
Angela's hand is up.
Yeah, just a question about the Explore Concordia platform. Is that a dynamic living platform, or is it, because that would be a nice platform to have everything in one place. I use it a lot to find people.
We are very much working on that, Angela, and David Ward, who is with us, will be so happy to hear you speak to that. We've spent the last 3-4 years really trying to move on the next gen of Explore, and that is exactly David and Prem's vision for that next phase. So let's hope that happens.
That's great. Emma, any comment on living labs? I'm returning back to this repeatedly because it's on my mind right now, because there's a there's some thinking about, there's a sustainability living lab that's actually existing right now that is funded by some money set aside for the sustainability action plan. I know that the Engage Center has used the living lab format in their own work on aging. There's some interest in milieu as well in the format. So I'm circling this one because I've just been
I'd like to kind of like to include Carly Zeder in this conversation.
Oh, sure.
But
yeah.
I can tell you what I do know, or sort of is that there's a lot of advice floating out there about how to make your property more welcoming to biodiversity. So mow less often, leave the leaves, blah, blah, blah. But most of that is kind of targeted at homeowners. And when you think of institutions like Concordia, who hire professionals to manage their green space, this is not part of their training. This is not on their radar. They're trained to make it look nice. And to my knowledge, this doesn't even exist, a kind of, best practice for landscape architects or green space managers or, gardening contractors of ecological practices. I mean, I don't think that, and if we could develop a kind of guideline for ecological management of campuses, of institutional spaces, not only universities, but, schools, hospitals, seniors' residences, company headquarters, I think there'd be a market for that.
And maybe some training associated with that through continuing education or other
well, I mean, if you want to look big, you could see it as, similar to the certification for energy efficient buildings, or sustainable certification for sustainable forestry.
Right.
I mean, that's looking really big and getting it to the level of professional certification, but I think there's a niche there. And I think the problem is that now the debate is at this level of people saying, oh, it's better for the bees if you don't mow. But at a very kind of personal kind of level, and we need to make it a professional target. In the same way that for managing forests, maintaining communities of carabid beetles has become a target for a forest manager. And how to get there, that's far, but I think Concordia could take some first steps there. And I know Carly Zeder is talking with Rocio
on the campus master plan work.
Yeah. And I think Carly's an example of, a young tenure track person who needs to be supported in doing this work because she has to think about being successful. And is putting a lot of energy into this and not always getting recognition for it. So yeah.
Agree.
Because for this to work, it can't be just done by undergraduates as little projects, it needs solid institutional investment.
Yeah, hear you. Good, Angela, maybe a last comment here and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, just very rapidly, the experiential learning program from Concordia, maybe that could be something to explore in terms of working with NGOs and sustainability and creating those opportunities. That would be one thing.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of emphasis there right now, and we're in the kind of expansion mode of opportunities, and the more we can build out these kind of collaborations with organizations that have their agendas and that we can have students contributing to, that's a super idea. Good. Well, I want to say a huge thanks for folks joining the conversation today. It was super rich. We came away with some great potential next steps. This is room number 15 out of 17, and so we've got a little ways to go yet, and so can't promise like we're going to write to you on Monday and say here's let's get going on the very next steps, but we are going to do a kind of like regrouping exercise once we've finished all the 17 rooms and really figuring out where are the best opportunities for Concordia to make an impact in relation to the SDGs. And there's a lot of great candidates for follow-up action that came out of the conversation today. So huge thanks to all of you for taking time on this gorgeous day to engage with us. And just want to just really commend you for committing yourselves and taking the time to really participate in this work today. A quick note from Anna before we sign off, and then I wish you a happy weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you and Monica for spearheading and leading us through this exercise on a weekly basis. It's a lot of energy on your end as well. We really appreciate it, of course, each time. Folks, as we're going to close the Zoom now, you'll have a survey that pops up that if we could ask you to take a minute or two just to answer a couple of quick questions to help us along as we finish up this process very soon, we would really appreciate it. So thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon. Until next time.